Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Tale of the Trilobites. In the last two videos, we talked about the Pedicoparida and Diagnostica, two of the most controversial orders of trilobites there are. And check those out if you're interested in learning more about those guys. This time, we shall be shifting our gears to a far more normal order, the Corynexochida. These are often described as the quote-unquote standard trilobite, and that's understandable given a lot of media representations of trilobites are based off this group. Despite this reputation, however, there's a lot of interesting info beneath this superficial blandness. In today's video, we should be talking about this group's evolutionary and taxonomic history, how they're related to other trilobites, the diversity within the order, their diagnostic traits, their ecology, their evolutionary history, and what exactly happened to them that caused their ultimate extinction. But let us start, as we always do, with how they relate to other trilobites, which is thankfully a lot less controversial than some other trilobite groups. The Corynexochida were the fourth oldest order, appearing first in Siberian deposits in the early Cambrian, after the first Britannica, Pedicoparida, and Diagnostica. It was first scientifically described in 1935 by noted Japanese scientist Teichi Kobayashi. While sometimes considered to have emerged out of the taxonomic mess that is Pedicoparida due to the pestle-shaped glabella, they share several lineages of this order, and this combined with a lack of early Cambrian forms of two of the three suborders led to a period of time in the 1990s when the group was thought to be potentially polyphyletic. However, future studies in 2003 found that the three suborders shared strong larval development features, indicating that they did in fact form a monophyletic order, and found that instead they likely descend from a separate lineage of Redlichida, likely the genus Prophylataspis, which was one of the first trilobites to exist. And speaking of the Redlichida, we're the subject of a previous episode that I suggest you check out if you're interested in learning more about the oldest of all trilobites. After this, the order has gone through little taxonomic shifts outside of some genera being moved into it from both the Redlichida and Saphido, which will be covered next time. With all the taxonomic stuff cleared up now, let's talk about the diagnostic traits of the Corynexochida and how one can identify them if you happen to find them in the field. Alright, so due to their somewhat generic nature, there's no single trait that can help one identify the group in the same way, say, the agnostics can be. Starting with their cephalon or head, they often have a pestle-shaped glabella with an elongated appearance. The hypostome is for the most part counterminant, though derived forms can be impedant. They typically have rather large eyes. In terms of their thorax or body, they typically have 7 to 8 segments, though some forms can have as few as 2 or as many as 12, with many bearing prominent spines. Their pygidium or tail segments generally are large, either sub-isophagus or isophagus in nature. One specific detail that I think is worth going over, particularly in this group, due to its prominence, that being how they often have an effacement. Briefly mentioned in a past video, which I suggest you check out if you're interested in learning more about trilobites' basic anatomy and the specific terms that are often used when describing this group. Effacement is when something is smooth and shows little details. This can often confuse taxonomists, as facial searchers are often used to delineate groups of trilobites, and also has some hints of their potential ecology, at least for some groups, which we shall talk about later. So hopefully, now you can identify them if you find them in your local rocks. Though, please contact your local museum for more info as needed, as well as if you have permission to take fossils. As oftentimes it's probably not exactly legal to do so, and it would be better if you simply marked the spot with a GPS and then called them. Anyway, now let us discuss the diversity to be found within this order of Corynexochida and see what that's like. Alright, so the Corynexochida are divided between three suborders: the Corynexochina, the Elania, and the Leosteginum. Let us start with the first of these, the Corynexochina, which gave rise to the other two. These are distinguished from the later two by the presence of a much larger thorax with up to 12 or more segments, a typically large pygidium, genal spines that are large, and a conterminant hypostome. It is the largest of the three suborders, containing 9 families. First, there is the family that gave both the suborder and order its name, the Corynexochidae. This is a fairly well-sized family of about 15 genera. The most notable ones include Corynexochus, which gave the group its name, and the strangely bubble-headed genus Acanthias, from what is now Sweden, Newfoundland, Germany, Siberia, Antarctica, and China, as well as other places. Next, we got the family Jacutidae, a reasonably sized family of around 16 genera, the most notable ones being Jacutus, arguably the most generic trilobite in existence, which itself makes it interesting in its own right due to comparisons with other groups. Then we got the Dinesidae, a good-sized family of about 25 genera. Sadly, none of which have really any photographic records on the internet, even though I looked for it for several weeks, so sorry about that. Then we got the family Dochimocephalidae, a healthy sized family of about 42 genera, the most notable ones being Bordetella from British Columbia, which had a very pebbly appearance. Then there was the family Dolichotopidae, which contains around 53 genera. Some of the most notable ones include Athabaskia and Hemerodon. Next, we come to the Doripygidae, which was an impressively large family of around 43 genera. The most notable one being Olenoides, Dorifygi, and Coutinia. Then we got the Edelteraspidae, a smaller family of around 15 genera, the most interesting of which is Edelesteinaspis. Then we got to the family Orycotocephalidae, which is fairly robust in size with 37 genera. The most notable ones were Orycocephalites. Last but not least, we got the family Zacanthoididae, a mid-sized family of around 27 genera. The most notable one is Zacanthoides from the western United States of America. Now we go on to the second suborder of the Corynexochidae to emerge, the Leostegina. These guys are distinguished by palpebral furrows on a broad cephalon. They typically have smaller thoraxes with 10 segments and a medium to large sized pygidium or tail segment, often bearing either terminal spines or a pair of lateral spines. It was also a diverse suborder with 7 families. Starting with the smallest of the families, there is Chiracheliddae, which contains only 4 poorly known genera, the most well-known one being Chirachelia. Then there is the Celiocephalidae, which contains 9 genera, the most notable one being Celiocephalus. Next, we got the small family of Elanuridae, which contains 12 genera, sadly, all of which are fairly poorly known and don't really have any real info or good photos of them on the internet. So, yeah, sorry about that. Then we got the family Caelicidae, which contains 27 genera. The most notable one is Masuria. Then we got to the largest family in the suborder, the Laostegidae, which contains 50 genera, the most notable one being Paleozoic. Then we got the smaller family of Ordocidae, which contains 13 genera. Sadly, again, none of these guys really have any photographic records of them. And last but not least, we got the family Pagodidae, which contains 17 genera, the most notable one being Pagodia, a very common form of trilobite. The third and last suborder of Corynexochida are the Elania, which are distinguished by being highly effaced, which does obscure their relationship, but also makes them distinct from the other two suborders, which often have spines. And they have smaller thoraxes or bodies with up to 8 or 10 segments in general. They also were some of the last of the Corynexochida, being the only ones around in the Silurian and Devonian. They also are the smallest of the suborders, with only 4 families. First, you got the middling-sized family, the Elanidae, which contains 25 genera, the most notable ones being Italialanus and Elanus itself, which, gave the group its name. Second, we see this small family Panduridae, which contains only 4 genera. The most interesting is the type of genus Pandaria. Then there is the family Ischianidae, which is a bit bigger with 12 genera, the most notable ones being the genus Sinania, a very smooth trilobite, literally. Last and largest family of this suborder are the Styginidae, which was huge with around 102 genera. Some notable ones included forms like Bumastus and Paragurus, known from Europe and Africa, as well as highly ornate forms like Scutellum and Colicopeltis, which had some prominent spines likely to help defend against placoderms. Overall, this group, despite the preconceived notion of being boring, actually has a very underappreciated level of diversity and had some really interesting forms. Now let's go to the ecology of the Corynexochida, aka how exactly they lived and where they fit in the broader ecosystem. Alright, so there hasn't been nearly as much focus on the ecology of this group compared to some others, but luckily there is a lot less controversy in this ecology, and it is believed that many forms, especially of the suborder Elania, were fossorial in nature, or aka they spend a lot of time burrowing. This can be inferred by how highly effaced they are, and their smooth bodies which allow for easier burrowing. Further evidence of this can be seen in some terrace ridges along the bottom edges of the trilobites, which would have functioned akin to those seen in a train to help provide resistance against fine silt and sand, which would have aided in burrowing as they go forwards. Also, given various species have both reduced and well-developed eyes, indicates that while they were burrowing, they dwelled in highly varied burrowing niches, both in shallow water and deeper water, both shallow burrowing and, deeper burrows. So there was a lot of, niche partitioning in this group. Other species, however, were likely not as proficient burrows, and so developed larger spines to defend themselves from new predators like eurypterids and placoderms, which is an interesting dichotomy here. And overall, as you can tell, they had a relatively simple ecology, but that was very important as it allowed them to have a very successful history. But now let's answer the question of what exactly happened to these guys? Why were the most generic of trilobites, going extinct? Alright, Right, so the Corynexochida emerged very shortly after the first trilobites during the early Cambrian, but were rather uncommon, especially compared to the dominant red Rhytlichida. However, after their extinction at the end of the Middle Cambrian, they, alongside the Pedicopaurida and early Asaphida, were the dominant trilobites of the late Cambrian. The end Cambrian extinction saw them lose the Corynexochida, one of their earliest of the three suborders, and by the end of the early Ordovician, the second suborder, the Laostegina, was also gone, as the Asaphids took over the dominant trilobite group, as well as newer groups also being emerging. Despite this, however, and despite losing two of the three suborders, they continue to thrive, and unlike the last two orders I've made videos about, their story did not end with the mass Ordovician and extinction event. Their generalized burrowing lifestyle allowed them to go through the event with relatively few, losses. This event also saw the end of the Asaphids, Agnostids, and Pedicopaurids. They remained relatively common, if not necessarily dominant, in the Silurian and Devonian, as the Phacopids, Protids, Odontoplurids, and Lachidids became the dominant trilobite groups, and ended up being the second longest lasting trilobite order, living until the end of the Devonian, when sadly their luck ran out. Alright, so the antediluvian mass extinction event was one of the big five, aka the biggest five extinction events. Also called the late Devonian extinction event, there was actually two events that occurred closely together, those being the Kellwasser event and the Hangenberg event. These events are believed to have several causes. One is volcanism, which led to ocean acidification and climate change, but far more interesting and unique to this event was the spread of large land plants. Now, you might ask how the spread of land plants could be bad, and admittedly for land life it really wasn't, but these plants could break down soil and stone and release nutrients that would be washed out by rain and down rivers into the ocean. This sudden burst of nutrients, which hadn't really occurred before, would cause algal blooms that would sap oxygen from the water, creating anoxic dead zones, where even the burrowing Corynexochida could not escape. Couple that with global cooling caused by CO2 being absorbed by plants and mountain building, these pressures were simply too much for these smooth guys, and sadly they died out. Alongside most other trilobite orders outside of Protida, it also wiped out all of the placoderms and most jawless fish. It was overall a really bad time to be in the ocean. Regardless of their final extinction, these guys are important because they show us how what we perceive as being boring slash standard can often hold an underappreciated level of diversity and interest. They also illustrate an argument against the notion that a lot of people believe that evolution just leads to lineages necessarily becoming more complex in order to succeed. And really, that's not the case. Evolution doesn't have a goal in mind, and if anything, will simplify something, such as, effacing an exoskeleton, if it means they can thrive in a niche. Anyway, I am the Dark Master, and if you liked this video, like it, but if you love this video, consider subscribing, and join me next time on the Tale of the Trilobites, where I shall be covering the next order of trilobites, the Asaphida. Have a wonderful day. Sorry, man, for